So I'm going to send the bibliography for this around, so everybody grab one and pass it along. I just want to remind everybody, right, that while I appreciate you sending me an emailed copy of your response paper to let me know that you did it on time, right, that doesn't count as the submission, right? You still have to get it submitted to Georgia. Now, for those couple of you who did not, I left it open until tonight, so if you haven't actually submitted it yet, you still have time to do so. I just, I need access to the tools in Georgia View in order to do the proper grading. So please just make sure that you get that into me by tonight. Okay, so I also have your quizzes on Biographia Literaria to give back to you at the end of class. And I did just want to say, I went a little bit easy on people because I know it's a difficult text, but you guys did a lot better with it than I expected you to. You guys understood a lot more than, frankly, I thought you were going to. So that's promising, right? That's good. Keep that up. So before we let our presenting group take the floor today, I do have the reading questions for the next texts that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at Percy Shelley's Defense of Poetry and John Keats's letter, I think it's the letter to Benjamin Bailey. It's the one that's marked negative capability in the, it's just, to George and Thomas Keats on page 967. It's, the letter on negative capability. So these are the things I want you thinking about. For Shelley, in particular, I want you thinking about his ideas about language, right? What does he have to say about language in its relationship to poetry? So first, there's a portion where he talks about how the aesthetic taste of a child or a savage, right? This is a word we don't really use anymore, differs from that of a civilized adult, and what this has to do with language and ideas of language. Secondly, what does Shelley think poets do to, not with, language? Right? How do poets help affect and shape language? And how does this make them, as he says in the last line of the essay, the unacknowledged legislators of the world? Now, as far as Keats is concerned, right, the main thing to get from Keats is this idea of negative capability. What is it, and why is this a desirable quality for a poet? And earlier in the letter, he talks about a meeting with a well-known London society wit named Horace Smith and his friends. How does he respond to his meeting with Smith? And what do his attitudes towards Smith reveal about his poetic values? So those of you who are still taking this down, take a couple minutes, just look up, acknowledge when you are finished, and then we will let our presenters get up and get this over with. You may.
Okay. So, in the first question, when it says the aesthetic taste of a child or a savage, do they mean, are they calling children savages, or are they seeking direct badly people of color? I can see big words, but I can't.
I think you'll have to read the paragraph to sort of figure that out.
Okay.
I don't think that Shelley has any particular racial group in mind when he uses that word. It was, at one time a commonly accepted term for people who were regarded as being in a lower state of civilization. Yeah, Jeremy, what were you going to say?
I was going to say savage and childish poet, they're both people that don't fully understand things in context. That's what it means.
That's probably it's close to what Shelley is, how Shelley means the terms. Yeah, but you'll have to read the paragraph to really kind of tease out what he's doing there. Are you guys gonna need the, okay, you guys think, okay.
Simply put that. I did manage to find Dory. It's amazing. And while I didn't put it in the bibliography, it
Uh-huh.
is in the publication.
Okay, yeah, oh yeah, it is, yeah.
What quoted from it.
Yeah. Okay, who's still writing? Oh, you are, okay.
What is the,
Yeah, that's fine.
just wanna make sure.
This is the working marker in case you need it. You're nodding because you're set, you're good? Okay, all right, so you guys can have this then. Do whatever you must. Begin when you are ready.
Where do we put
You
this?
have to open the front cabinet.
Okay. There's a front cabinet. Oh, this is so weird. Okay. Where is it? There it is. You guys ready? Okay. Which one do I use? Sledge? Ha! Here we go. Okay. Our group is presenting Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Linda will be speaking about the symbolism represented within the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, while Hayleigh is doing mysticism and religion. Drew will be taking on an entirely different approach with the political aspect, followed by Keith with her interpretation of the importance of imagination in addition to the psychological aspect. As for myself, I did PowerPoint, and I will be putting the bow on the entire package and wrapping up with how all of our work together sums up the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. To get started, may I have a volunteer read the lines 13 through 20 on page 444. It's the third and fourth stanza. Any volunteers?
444.
444, third and fourth stanza.
Okay.
Thank you.
Stanza again?
Third and fourth, lines 13 to 20.
It should start with he holds me.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry.
He holds him?
Yes.
44. Yep, nice. He holds him with his glittering eye. The wedding guest stood still and listens like a 3 years child. The mariner hath his will. The wedding guest sat on a stone, he cannot choose but hear, and thus spake that ancient man, the bright-eyed mariner. The ship was cheered, the harbor cleared, merrily did we drop, below the kirk, below the hill, below the lighthouse top. The sun came up upon the left, out of the sea he came, and he shone bright, and on the right went down into the sea. Higher and higher every day, till over the mast at noon, the wedding guest here beat his breast, for he heard the last bassoon.
Okay, thank you. Descriptive passages are found throughout the entire poem. This creates vivid images from the mariner himself to the ship's entire passage and throughout the start of the poem to the end, and up into the departure of the mariner himself. The particular word usage points a vivid picture that helps bring the poem to life in one's mind as you are reading the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The story captures the attention of the young and old alike. I've created this PowerPoint for your viewing pleasure as we proceed through this presentation. Please hold all questions, comments, and concerns until the end. And now, we are going to hear from Linda with her thoughts on symbolism found throughout the ancient Mariner.
Thank you so much, Cal. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm actually going to start off by discussing the Sublime in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And it's wonderful that she just had Ashley read lines 13 through 16 because that is where I'm going to start off. And but before I do that, I'm getting off track. I'm just going to first talk about, as we discussed in previous classes, the Sublime is usually something that kind of has us in awe, something majestic or beautiful, or as in the case of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, it's something that causes us to be in awe as well as terror. And on page 444, we start off right away with Sublime in lines 13 through 16, where Ashley read, "He holds him with his glittering eye, the wedding guest stood still, and listens like a 3 years child, the mariner hath his will." This also comes into play when talking about Sublime because the wedding guest has lost control, he's lost power, he is being held by that glittering eye. And many times just the unknown can be really, really scary. And at this point, we don't know what's going to happen. All we know is that the wedding singer is being held kind of against his will. He has no control over his actions, the wedding guest. And he's like a 3-year-old child. He is submissive to the mariner. This total loss of control adds to the Sublime. Sorry, I just repeated myself. And if we go to page 445, lines 59 through 62 is going to show more. Could I get a volunteer to read those 4 lines, please? On page 445, lines 59 through 62.
Starts with the ice.
I'll read just that one.
One statement.
The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled like noises in a swamp.
Thank you so much. So they are surrounded by ice, and this ice cracked, it growled, and it howled. This is some scary stuff. To me, the Sublime in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner kind of is like in a scary movie where the scary music comes in and you kind of tense up and you know something's going to happen, but you don't know what is. I feel like that's kind of what he does here. He is just something scary is about to happen. Well, in the case throughout the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, but especially in the lines that we just read, we are being prepared for a scary ride. The unknown fills us with anxiety, and the unknown is often the scariest part of any ordeal. The Sublime continues to carry us all the way to the end of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And if you go to page 459, the last 4 lines, could I get a volunteer to read the last 4 lines starting with "He went like"? Thank you.
He went like one that hath been stunned, and is of sense forlorn. A sadder and a wiser man, he rose the morrow morn.
Thank you. So, all the way through, and even here at the end, the Sublime is playing with us. He has been stunned, the wedding singer has been stunned, and he leaves a sadder, wiser man because he knows of this awful tale. So, with that being said, I'm going to continue on with symbolism now. And I'm going to start by first talking about the symbolism behind the wedding itself, which the wedding is symbolic of happiness, fertility, life, and as you see, we don't really see too much of that in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And the mariner himself, he is symbolic of terror, and he represents an almost ghost-like figure. He's a spirit. And the glittering eye, if we go to page 449, and if I could get a volunteer to read like 221, wait a minute, lines 224 to 231, I'm so sorry. 224, starting with "I fear thee." Thank you.
221 to 224.
Yes, thank you so much.
I fear thee, ancient mariner. I fear thy skinny hands, and thou art long and lank and brown, as is the ribbed sea sand. I fear thee in thy glittering eye, and thy skinny hands so brown. Fear not, thou wedding guest, this body dropped, not drowned.
Thank you so much for that. Well, here we see that the glittering eye almost has him in a trance. He's like hypnotized by it, and he can't get away. And again, this goes back to what I said earlier in the Sublime, in that he's lost control. Now we're going to go over to page 444. And I'm going to read lines 21 through 24 because there are 3 things in those lines that I want to share with you what symbolism is. And so lines 21. The ship was cheered, the harbor cleared. Merrily did we drop. Below the kirk, which here, kirk means church. Below the kirk, below the hill, below the lighthouse top. So the kirk, the church, is symbolic, of course, of religion. The hill that they are now below is symbolic of familiarity. And the lighthouse is symbolic of safety and security, and they're leaving that. They're like drifting away from their safe harbor. The sea is symbolic of danger and the unknown. Now the sun. The sun is symbolic of divine justice, and when I read through it, I found that the sun to be symbolic of an almost angry God, a God who's not very happy with the mariner's actions of killing the albatross with his bow and arrow, and who must punish him. The moon is symbolic of forgiveness and a kinder, forgiving God. And if you go to page 450, if I could get a volunteer to read lines 263 to 266, please, on page 450. Thank you, Jeremy.
It starts with the movie Moon, correct?
263. 450. Yes,
The
please.
moving moon went up the sky, and nowhere did abide. Softly she was going up, and a star or two beside.
So the moon is going up, and something is about to happen that is going to give the mariner forgiveness. And I'm going to go ahead and read on page 451, lines 282 to 291. Oh, happy living things, no tongue, their beauty might declare. A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware. Sure, my kind saint took pity on me, and I blessed them unaware. The self-same moment I could pray, and from my neck so free, the albatross fell off and sank like lead into the sea. So, the albatross is symbolic of a good omen turned bad. Of course, when the mariner shot and killed the albatross, it was part of the curse. But when, and it isn't until the mariner is able to pray that, and following the moon going up, that he is forgiven. This cross that he had to bear around his neck as part of his punishment falls off his neck because he's now able to pray and he's forgiven. And that wraps it up as far as the symbolism goes. I'm sure that there's more in there that I missed, but that was just a start. Thank you so much, and at this time I'm going to turn it over to Hayleigh.
Okay, in the late 1700s and early 1800s, everyone was really superstitious, and most of them were about death. And one of them is if 13 people sit down and the first one to get up, they die within a year. Or if 3 candles are burning, then someone's going to die soon. But the main one in this poem is the evil eye, which is on lines 256
to 261 on page 450.
I'm going to read that on 256.
The cold sweat melted from their limbs, nor rot nor weep did they. The look with which they looked on me had never passed away.
Okay, so they're just staring at him, giving him the evil eye, which is basically a way to be asked to be cursed. And so in the poem, the mariner kills the albatross, basically just out of spite because it's there. And the crew ends up tying the albatross around his neck because he needs to be reminded of his constant sin of what he did, which was to kill something that God has created. Can't do that. And so when the crew falls down and everyone dies except him, their souls come flying at him, and it sounds like the crossbow, so he's again reminded of what he did. And a ghost ship appears, and there's 2 people on it. It's life and death, and they basically gamble for his life if he should live or die. And they end up letting him live because he needs to repent for his sins. But they punish him constantly with, they stop the wind so the boat's not moving, so he's in the sun constantly. There's no water for him, so he's getting dehydrated. But he killed something of God that God created, and he needs to be punished constantly for that. And they doom him to walk the earth forever, to tell his story, so people know not to kill or mistreat anyone that God has created. And he's basically in
Purgatory.
Yeah, because he's dead, but his real body comes to life to tell the story every once in a while. But the wedding guest realizes that he's a spirit towards the end, And the last lines of the poem, it's like the last few lines.
459.
The last 2 lines is sadder and a wiser man, he rose the morrow morn. So basically, yeah. Okay, well, I'm getting there. He's sad because he realizes that he's basically just sitting there talking to a dead person, you know, and missed the entire wedding party. But he ends up becoming wiser because he's learned a valuable lesson for life to not kill anything God has created. Anything you'd like to add? Because that's all I have.
It's good.
All right, and I will interject with my point regarding the political aspects of the poem. So does everyone have this? All the notes here? Everyone good? So regarding the religious aspect of the poem, with me, the political aspect of the poem, I wanted to focus more on the guilt that lies in the ancient mariner. So with the guilt of the ancient mariner, there's certain religious aspects that you can tie with it. There's also symbolic aspects, but with my political aspects, I wanted to bring attention to kind of like the mentality and the mind frame of the English people at this time. So, with the sailors, for example. The sailors and their sickness and their illness and the abidement of the illness can be symbolic to the yellow fever, which at the time was a very devastating disease that impacted sailors in particular during this time frame. And a common belief of the yellow fever with the English people at the time is that it was actually carried by the African slaves. Now you may be wondering, well, what does this have to do with the actual poem in and of itself? And that would be a wonderful question. But if you look on the quote on last page, 459, on the fourth stanza, on the lines that says, "Keep great best." Can I have a volunteer that would read that for me? He prays best. It's on page 459.
Oh, he prays best, who loveth best, all things both great and small. For the dear God who loveth us, he made and loveth all.
Yeah. So, oftentimes people under the political aspect, they would take that line into the romanticist ideal of abolitionism, which during this time, how can I say it? It's like the people of England, well, let's say it like this. The people of England so with the guilt and I'm falling apart. So with the guilt,
It's okay, you got this. This is good stuff. Just take a deep breath.
it's just a lot of content. I don't know how to address it. So, guilt of the ancient mariner. With the quote that I just said, what Hayleigh said earlier regarding his absolvement from sin, attaining forgiveness in a sense. Have you ever stopped to question what the actual sin might actually encompass from the people during this time frame? Anyone? Well, the sin that I'm arguing is the slave trade at this time. And when you look into the common man that you can see in the wedding guest. On page. It's on page 449, and it is lines 228. Starts with "I fear thee," and I'll read it. "I fear thee, and thy glittering eye, and thy skinny hand so brown. Fear not, thou wedding guest. This body drop not down." Now, there are two lines in that are actually quite interesting. So, with "and thy skinny hand so brown," there's a theory that could actually symbolize the ancient mariner is a slave, maybe. He could actually be a slave and was talking under the perspective of a slave in the actual ship during the course of the story. Or you could look into the words, "this body drop not down." Now, in a sailor perspective, the body drop not down, you can correlate this to the yellow fever. Now, with the European public, and I was kind of trying to get to it earlier, but I knew it wasn't making a lot of sense. But basically, these two at this time frame are basically just one and the same, essentially. It's all a part of the hysteria, the stereotype, the I'm trying to find the better word for it, the superstition of the people at the time. So if you were infected by the yellow fever, basically what that means is that at this time frame you got too close to the slave, or you have done regarding certain things, and that the slave was the actual carrier of the disease. And it's part of the stereotype. That's why, like, at the time, it's another contributor of why they should stay away from it. And it's not true, obviously. What actually it was the mosquitoes at the time, was a small note. It was the mosquitoes that carried it, but it was irrelevant to the hysteria that was taking place in the first place. And so the question goes, the question is, how does it all go along to the wedding guest, to the perspective of the public, the audience that is reading this book, the white man in Britain at this time? And so the differentiation goes along with the yellow fever and then the slave itself. It all contributes to the wedding guest's psychological status of being constrained and his reaction to the wedding guest in the story in the first place. Does that kind of make sense? Like, regarding when I say political aspect of the wedding guest? All right. So this moves on to the absolvement of sin with the mariner, when he reads kind of later on into the poem. Farewell, farewell. It's on line 610 of 459. On line 610. It says, farewell, farewell, but this I tell to thee, thou wedding guest, who prayeth well, who loveth well, both man and bird and beast. So the lesson within the absolvement of sin, what was learned, is that basically you love all. And it is a quality of romanticism, which was a movement that started developing within this time period. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, romanticism. the dissolvement of forgiveness, all these attributes to Romanticism, it interplays into the mentality of the British people and contributed to the abolition of slavery later on this time. Because in Britain, I believe the dissolvement of slavery took place in 1807, and this was only a decade before. So although it may appear subtle when with Coleridge writing this poem, but it is something to think about with the time period, with the certain relative quotes that you will see numerous times throughout the story, and regarding the dissolvement of sin, the lesson, with the sailors being sick. They took their sickness as a way of saying that I am immoral, that I am corrupt, that I myself contributed to this actual situation that I'm in. And so, yeah. But that's about my entire point with the political aspect. I will turn it over to Keith, who will then discuss the psychological aspect of the actual mariner and the wedding guests.
Okay, thank you, Drew. Okay, so before I start, I want you guys to think about when we were younger and we were kids, our imagination was wild and it was everywhere. You had a lot of questions to ask, a lot to talk about. You gotta have to go back to that whenever you discuss the imagination theme, because it's so creative and he incorporates so much. All of their themes that they talked about, that they are going to talk about, they're all thrown into imagination. That's just how in-depth it is. So, in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, as we have seen, Coleridge he has a very exotic imagination. He takes pieces of mythology from Greek and Roman myths and also Christian scriptures to incorporate this ghost and zombie-like story. From that, we see how all these different themes, come together to, create imagination. So two points that I have, elements of the supernatural and Coleridge, just his storytelling aspects. Along with that comes his psychological factors, what his thought process, what was going on in his mind. So all of that, contributes to his imagination. So if you turn to page 445, line 41, he says, and now the storm blast came, and he was tyrannous and strong. This element simply just of weather, meteorology that goes into supernatural. That's just, something of his imagination. That was the opening he created for part one. He wanted us to envision, oh, okay, it's a storm going on. So we see that from his point. And just kind of how you're reading, a book, watching a movie, anything like that, you're kind of interested. If it's interesting or captures your attention, you're going to want to read it, you're going to want to watch it more. That's kind of what he does here. And something else too, he has, y'all heard of the story Canterbury Tales, right? I know y'all read that. That's kind of what this reminded me of. He had a story within the story, and he talked about, he started off with the wedding guests. They were going to a wedding, and then he goes on to grasp one of the wedding guests and talks about, this story, this interesting story. And all of that goes into a creative aspect, imagination. He wants people to imagine, imagine yourself in this story, imagine yourself in this situation. And another aspect that deals with more astronomy of it, he talks about on page 446, line 83, he says, the sun now rose upon the right, out of the sea came he. That's another aspect too. Just about everything that you see, you envision in this story, all of that goes back to imagination, because that's just how powerful and strong it is in this story. It combines everything. And so with that, he helps us to imagine, this is the opening of part two. He helps us to imagine that as well. So every little detail, every little aspect, all comes back to imagination. And I have more examples, but this book is this poem is filled with examples that talk about, supernatural, all of that. Even from, the ship, when he talks about, life and death, the dice game, all of that goes back to imagination. Without his, thought process and mind, none of this would have been created. So that goes into, his storytelling aspects and, his psychological factors, because we don't know him personally, but what he was thinking, imagining in his head, all of that is thrown into it. So you kind of see the type of person he was, something about his life, something he's trying to tell us. It's all a part of that thought process that he wants us to imagine. And with that, again, all of the themes, everything that's in this story, all of the details, everything, it all goes back to imagination. But yeah, he's hinting at with the imagination, each of us can grasp something that's different from this, because Drew took it to a political, everybody, it's hard not to grasp anything from this because it's so creative, and he really embodies a lot. So we can really take a lot from that. But yeah, that's what I have to say. But you really can't you can't go wrong with the imagination here. It's just, it really is powerful. I don't know if everybody read the story, but it really does talk about a lot. And I think that's hinting at something, that's what I think. I think it's hinting at, maybe something he went through or something he's going through. It's just his thought process, what he was thinking. That's why I threw in the psychological factors of it, because it's just so detailed and engaging to me, just to see his thought process. So, Kel, that's it.
That's it. Well, thank you. With everything that you've heard, it's very easy to see that the poem itself can be taken in many different viewpoints, many different aspects. From the images that I've shown, which, in my opinion, tie really well into the story. The creator, the artist, is Gustave Doré, and he did portraits, I believe they're portraits, in the late 17th century, time of the writing of the poem. While the images depict only the artist's point of view, I feel that they are very representative from the word usage depicted by Coleridge. At this time, I'd like you to take out a piece of paper and pen or pencil. I'm going to have a small quiz. Okay. Most stated in your life. Number 1. What was hung about the mariner's neck? What was hung about the mariner's neck? Number 2, what is the bride compared to?
Please repeat that.
What is the bride compared to? Number 3, who are the 2 figures aboard the ghost ship? Number 4, how do all the crewmates look upon the mariner in part 2? And the final question, how much water does the mariner drink after spotting the other ship? Everybody done?
Did anyone get all the questions.
Do you need a repeat of any of the questions?
What was the last one?
Last one. How much water does the mariner drink after spotting the other ship?
Can you repeat the third one?
Number 3. Who are the 2 figures aboard the ghost ship? Any others? Okay. Who knows the answer to number 1? What was hung about the mariner's neck?
The albatross. The albatross.
Very good. What was the bride compared to?
The rose.
She's got it. Who are the 2 figures aboard the ghost ship?
Death and a woman.
Death and
A woman.
a woman.
What was the longest?
The name that gave it in the footnotes was life and death.
That's it?
That's it. And number 4, how do all the crewmates look upon the mariner in part 2? Anyone? With the evil eye. Nobody got it. Oh my gosh. Number 5, how much water does the mariner drink after spotting the other ship?
No.
Bingo. He doesn't. He bites his wrist and drinks his own blood because there's no water, water everywhere, none to drink. Okay, that concludes our presentation. Thank you for your attention. And what is your writing?
I'm writing all the answers. Just in case no one got it. Here we go.
Thanks, guys.
We took 25 minutes. My PowerPoint was 25 minutes long.
That was polite. Okay.
Does everyone have all those?
You guys actually stole some of my thunder. Covered some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about.
Isn't that a good thing?
It is, yeah, it is a good thing, yeah. Yeah. But I particularly just want to expand a little bit briefly on Drew's point about the yellow fever. So the brownness of the mariner's skin could indicate it could indicate some connection with slavery, but not quite in the same way it was proposed. Like, it could indicate that he's a yellow fever survivor. One of the reasons that the disease was called yellow fever was because if you survived, it darkened your skin. But yeah, it does definitely imply a connection with the slave trade. And Coleridge and several of his friends, at the time he was writing the poem, were active abolitionists. So another thing that could connect this poem directly to the slave trade, in what direction is the ship sailing when they get blown off course?
At first he's going north and then he turns south.
They're actually going, yeah, they're going south. They're going towards the equator, right? There's that, you know, when they hit the line, right, when the sun is up at mid-mast, and that's when they get blown to the land of snow and ice, right? They're not blown to the Arctic, they're blown to Antarctica. So yeah, so he is moving the ship is moving in the right direction. Bless you. To be participating in that triangular trade that we talked about when we discussed Olata Equiano. And there is actually something else that this poem has in common with Equiano. What was one of the big themes we noticed in Equiano's autobiography? Particularly sort of his relationship to language. what's always happening to Equiano and to people like him?
People are saying that he speaks too much.
Yeah, there's a silencing going on there, right? Think to that the slave muzzle, right? For example, that the woman's wearing in the kitchen when he first enters that house in Virginia, right? So there's a lot of silencing going on here as well, right? On the one hand, like after the mariner kills the albatross and the ship stops moving and everyone's throats go dry, right? No one can talk, right? Everyone is silenced by the mariner's sin of killing the albatross. Now, this is a really puzzling poem, right? There's a lot about it that's strange and it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, and there are parts of it that are rather contradictory, right? But if we, yeah, go ahead, Barry.
I was talking about all of them can't speak. I think at that part of it, because he kills the bird, they're kind of mad at him, and then they see some good come of it, and they're like, oh, okay, I guess it was all right.
Yeah.
So they become accomplices, it said. They kind
Yeah.
of share in the guilt.
The bird, he kills the bird and the wind dies, right? But soon after, the fog clears. So the fickle crew, right, decide, oh, well, okay, it must have been all right that he killed the bird, right? Now, do any of you know what an albatross is or what it looks like?
It's kind of like a seagull. There's one in my slideshow.
Yes, there was one in the slideshow.
There's actually 3.
It's a little bit like a seagull, but it's much bigger, right?
Pretty huge. You have up to 14 feet wingspan.
Yeah.
One
They're,
of the top 3 or 5 wingspan.
yeah, their bodies are kind of small, right? But they have enormous wings. And an albatross is incredibly graceful in the air, but is really clumsy on land because of those enormous wings, right? So the albatross is often used as a figure for the poet. It's often used as a metaphor for a poet, right? Clumsy in prose, perhaps, but skilled and graceful, in sort of airy flights of language. In fact, there's a poem by the mid-19th century French poet Charles Baudelaire, he's not a romantic, he's too late, but he's heavily influenced by Romanticism, in which he does exactly this, right? He uses the clumsy albatross as a metaphor for the poet. Now, whether that's what Coleridge is doing, I'm not sure, but there does seem to be a connection between the death of the albatross and loss of the ability to speak. Right? Once the crew share in the crime, right? Once they agree the mariner has done a good thing, that's when everybody's throats go dry and everybody gets silenced, right? And the mariner can only speak again by doing himself injury, right? Essentially by feeding upon himself. Or he has to suck his own blood in order to shout a warning to the rest of the crew, hey, a ship is coming, right? And actually, if we look at the way the crew is described in those passages as well, that's actually another connection to the yellow fever. The blackened lips. Usually people who are in the late stages of yellow fever started sort of vomiting up black bile. So that's another possible relation to the yellow fever. But when all the sailors are silenced, what does this mean? What is language necessary for? Yeah, if nobody can talk, right? If nobody can communicate, then you can't function as a community, right? It doesn't matter, the ship's not going anywhere anyway, right? There's no work to do. They're all just roasting to death and dehydrating. But they can't even talk to one another, right? They can't even communicate with one another.
So it's kind of like a form of isolation. Like they all know that they're there, but they can't have that human form of reaching out.
Yeah, and I think this sort of goes back to that line, once everyone else is dead, right? The mariner talks of being alone in a wide, wide sea, right? he's been alone for a while before that, right? Everybody is essentially alone with their crime at this point, right? So the reason I'm harping on this, the reason I'm focusing on this is because the poem seems to address issues of community in various ways. Right, if we look at the last speech the mariner makes on page 459, right, starting at the bottom of page 458, right, we've got that last full stanza there, right? O wedding guest, this soul hath been alone on a wide, wide sea. So lonely 'twas that God himself scarce seemed there to be. O sweeter than the marriage feast, 'tis sweeter far to me, to walk together to the kirk with a goodly company. To walk together to the kirk, and all together pray, while each to his great Father bends, old men and babes and loving friends, and youths and maidens gay. Farewell, farewell, but this I tell to thee, thou wedding guest. He prayeth well who loveth well, both man and bird and beast. He prayeth best who loveth best all things both great and small, for the dear God who loveth us, he made and loveth all. So he seems to be endorsing this idea of a kind of community of faith, right? That faith is best expressed in community with other people, right? Who all walk together to the kirk, right? And yet, what is he stopping the wedding guest from joining? He's stopping the wedding guest from participating in a communal ceremony, right? The wedding guest, he said, the wedding feast is, and I am next of kin, right? So he's essentially stopped the best man at the door of the wedding and said there was a ship and just held this guy with his glittering eye, right?
Traumatized him.
Yeah. And then the poor bastard wanders home alone, right? A sad and wiser man. So he's talking here a lot about forming a community of faith, and yet he wanders alone. He's the last survivor of this ship, and he's stopping someone else from participating in community life, right? Yeah, Ashley.
Could it be, like, I kind of sort of have this theory that the mariner himself has sort of become immortal, kind of has this curse thing going on. And I was wondering, is this him spreading some sort of, like, not like the curse of, ooh, you have to walk the earth and stuff, but like this curse of isolation or pushing people away from, like community setting?
There is a lot of talk of eyes here, right? And people cursing each other with their eyes, and looking into someone's glittering eye and being ensorcelled, right? Enchanted, and enslaved by the glare, right? So yeah, I'm not entirely sure about the whole sort of like immortal vampire thing. But there's something supernatural about the ancient mariner, right?
Mm-hmm.
This guy, the way he tells it, he's compelled every now and then to go wander and find somebody who needs this bit of wisdom and impart it to them, right? So he's impelled by whatever force to find some poor sap and ruin his life, right? But to take this back to this idea of community, right? When the mariner comes back to, well, let me put it to you this way. Who's responsible for destroying the shipboard community in the first place? Yeah. The mariner is a breaker rather than a builder of communities, right? With the whiz of his crossbow, he kills the albatross. And then, as I think one of you noted in your part of the presentation, right, and that sound is repeated, right? The reference to the crossbow is made again as all of his shipmates drop dead after death and life in death show up and play their little dice game, right? And life and death, just as a little side note here, has been argued, right, given that, she is a represented as a beautiful woman with leprous pale skin. There are some who argue that she represents the common sailor's disease of syphilis. Which, in an advanced enough stage, causes your body parts to fall off, rather like leprosy. Right, so because the mariners killed the albatross, all of his shipmates died, right? And he sails on alone. And when he finally meets the hermits, the pilots, does everybody know what a pilot is in this?
Like the captain? Like the captain?
No, well, he is a guy with a boat, right? Essentially, big ocean-going ships are too large to sail into a harbor by themselves, right? So they have to have, pardon?
Like, I'm sorry, so he runs a lighthouse.
No, he doesn't run a lighthouse. He has a boat that he uses to come and guide ships into harbor, right? It's not a tugboat, like he doesn't, grab the ship and tow it in. But, they fix on the pilot, and the pilot shows them the safe way to get into the harbor, right? So, what does he expect is going to happen when he meets the hermits back on, and gets back to land? What's the hermit supposed to do for him?
Absolve him.
Yeah, he's supposed to absolve him of his sins, right? And when you're absolved of the mark of sin, right, you're supposed to then be able to rejoin the human community, right? But is the mariner actually absolved?
No,
Why would you say no?
because he's doomed to walk the earth and repeat this tale
Yeah, if he was actually absolved, he wouldn't have to do this shit, right?
over and over.
Over and over and over again, right? And when the hermit and the pilot's boy meet him, right? The pilot has a seizure, and the pilot's boy goes mad, right? There's something funny about this, right? It's something that's not quite human anymore that has an effect on other people.
It's almost as if he's been touched by death.
Yeah, or disease, madness, something, right? At any rate, there's something about the mariner that now that Markson is not quite fully human, right? And is there something weird in the first place about expecting a hermit to reintegrate you into society? I mean, yeah, again, this is one of those holy hermits, right? Who, sits and prays in the woods, right? But again, right, this is another figure for loneliness, right? He's a figure for contemplative loneliness, right? Religious meditation, rather than, simply a guy who sat alone on a ship for a long, long time. And so what was it that changes the mariner's fate aboard the ship? What does he have to learn to do?
To love things in nature.
Yeah, he complains about the water snakes, right, when the sun is still up. Right, 1,000 slimy things lived on, and so did I. Right, he talks about these disgusting creatures that he sees swimming about in the deeps. And then, when the moon comes up, right, he sees them under a different light. His attitude towards them changes. Right, he sees the beauty of these creatures. He sees the beauty of all life, and he blesses them. And this is when the albatross falls off of his neck, right? So in addition to this sort of community loneliness binary, or the community individual binary, right? He has to learn to think of himself as part of a group rather than as a lone individual. We also have the sun-moon dichotomy. And I think one of you noted that the sun seems sort of like an angry god here, right? It burns hot, it parches everybody, it sucks the water out of their bodies, right? The sun is a punishing force, right? So what's different about the moon that makes this a more fit representation of, say, forgiveness and regeneration?
The moon has, I took it as like the moon having a tide of sailors, as the moon like controls the tides and like
Okay.
influences waves.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the moon controls the tides, right? The water goes in and out, in and out, in and out. So it's a big part of a sailor's life anyway. What else what other qualities are particular to the moon that differentiate it from the sun? Yes, Jeremy.
So it has light, it isn't as hot as the sun.
Okay, yeah, not hot. Yeah, in fact, the moon actually, I mean, I'm not sure if Coleridge actually knew this, but the moon only reflects the light of the sun, right? It doesn't actually give off light. So, yeah. So it's cool rather than hot. What else?
You can actually see the cycles.
Yeah, the moon
Represents the different phases.
is, cyclical, right? This is kind of related to the idea of the tides as well. The tides are cyclical. They go in and out, right? You can see the moon regenerate itself from like a blank hole in the sky to a sliver, to a half, to a full eventually, right? So yeah, the moon is an image then of kind of total regeneration. Slow, gradual over time. But yeah, the whole picture comes into focus by the end of the month. Right? In fact, that's where the word month comes from, right? From moon cycle. All right, so do any of you guys have any questions about the poem? Is there anything that's really confusing or bothering you about this? Anything that's unclear or, yeah, go ahead, Romona.
The one thing that I found irritating was the fact that it never like pinpoints how often he tells his tale.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's a lot that's unclear
right?
about the poem. Right? The plot can be a little hard to follow, though there clearly is one, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not always clear who's acting on what. And indeed, like as we pointed out here, right, much of what the poem says and does seems to turn in on itself, right? Seems to contradict itself. So these were actually complaints that Coleridge's contemporaries had about the poem when it was first published in 1798. So at a certain point in the poem's publication history, Coleridge added these little prose glosses in the margins, right? They didn't originally appear in the poem. They weren't originally part of the
They
poem.
do help.
They do and they don't, right? Because sometimes the interpretation of the gloss seems to be at odds with the actual passage that it's next to, right? Or doesn't seem directly connected to what it's next to, right? Now, what he's trying to do there with these glosses is imitate the style of a 17th century scholar editor, right? So on the one hand, he's providing a kind of explanatory structure for the poem, but he's also trying to make it look like something older, right? Like something from a past age, which is very much in keeping with those antiquarian values that we talked about. I think we discussed Wordsworth, right? That there were all these people in the 18th century who were not only paying people to pretend to be hermits on their property while they built these, silly Gothic castles all over the place, but were also going around collecting folk ballads and reviving medieval and older traditions, right? So yeah, so part of the idea of the glosses is to make this look even more kind of backward looking. And yeah, they kind of help, but not really.
Is the backward, like you mentioned, that it's supposed to make it seem older than it is, doesn't that tie into the narrative, like you said, like, we don't know how long or how much the mariner has told his tale, and it kind of goes in with my theory that it's like some sort of Davy Jones thing, where I don't know if he drags himself out of the sea covered in, like, moss and stuff, like, there's no moss on the water, seashells.
He doesn't appear to be damp, right? Yes. In fact, he kind of looks, the way he's described, I would say, he kind of looks more dried out than anything else, right?
Shrunken.
Yeah, I mean, I think though, like, there is that ambiguity as to whether the mariner is, you know, a living man who is occasionally possessed, or, you know, sort of a dead, doomed spirit, right? He seems to represent himself as being alive, right? This body dropped, not down, right? I didn't die with the others.
At least he thinks he's alive.
Yeah, but yeah, at any rate, it's one of the things, one of those many things the poem doesn't quite resolve, right? But the things that Coleridge is trying to do here, right, that relate directly to Romanticism, right? One, he is using archaic language and supernatural imagery to try to create a kind of air of mystery, right? And he is also making a few, not always clear and certainly kind of abstract comments on political life and religion, right? It's not entirely orthodox religion here either, right? There's probably more Plato in here than there is in the King James Bible, with all the talk of invisible spirits and whatnot. But yeah, we are about out of time here. Does anybody have other questions about this? Yeah, Barry.
I know you talk about you just mentioned the spirit from the South Pole being connected with the albatross and
Yeah.
revenge for his death.
Uh-huh.
But at one point it says that he takes his revenge on the mariner by doing something with the mast. I couldn't tell if it broke or if it killed him. It said it hit him.
Uh-huh.
Something.
Yeah, I mean the mariner the mariner seems to survive at least as long as it takes him to get back to England. But he's just certainly changed, right? He's different, and not just emotionally or psychologically different, like a different kind of creature. So, yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if this like helps or anything, but I feel like it's like interesting. Their actual like them hitting a dead spot with no waves in the sea is an actual like natural occurrence.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Sailors used to encounter.
You still do encounter them to this day.
And it was like.
But you can get around him with a motor.
Yeah, but back then.
Or even if the ship had oars, right? Yeah. But those big, Renaissance era sailing ships did not have oars.
Probably didn't have the manpower and the strength to do it anyway.
Sure. Well, I mean.
The Viking ships used strings, didn't
Yeah, but the Viking ships were small and fleet, and weren't made to carry much apart from people and plunder. Plenty of plunder. All right, so we're gonna stop there. We're gonna be looking at Shelley and Keats next time, right? So just keep those guide questions in mind. Try to track those through the two readings, and we'll see you on Thursday. Oh, let me before you go, I have your quizzes from last week to get back to you as well.